Steve, the WrestleMania is moving forward. The show goes on. First of all, is there anything more Vince McMahon to you than the show going on? Does this surprise you, or did you think Vince McMahon would move forward and have WrestleMania?
I didn't know what to think. A couple of weeks ago, I was down there in Tampa at the Performance Center, working in front of that empty, in that empty building. And, that's Vince's mentality. Show must go on. Way back in Kansas City, when Owen fell to his death, the show went on. I mean, so it's just, that's his mentality, and God rest his soul. But, it's tough. Those guys
was it hard
out
for
there.
You? Was it hard being? You've never done that before. What was that like?
Well, I've worked in front of some empty buildings before,
but not intentionally. So
it wasn't because everything was quarantined, because there wasn't nobody there, and that's when you really learn how to work the people. So you're trying desperately anything you can. I was strange, to do something like that. I really kind of just wanted to go out there and do like a sit down interview with Byron or Jerry Lawler and talk about actually what 316 meant to me, so many years ago, cutting that promo in 96, winning King of the Ring. And all these years later, we didn't have social media. I think Twitter was created in 06, Instagram in 2010 or something like that. So all these years later, the WWE universe still, made 316, official, Austin 316 day, unheard of. But that's due to social media. So I wouldn't talk about the impact of, the resonation with the fans on that. And just give people something to think about and talk about. But we did what we did, and that was their creative, so it was what it was. But it was hard, to your point.
It's got to be challenging. I mean, I'll tell you this: when you think about WrestleMania, and by the way, it's airing April 4th and 5th on the WWE Network, 2 days. I think who I'm most bummed out for is Drew McIntyre. I think Drew McIntyre really has this exciting opportunity to get the shot with Brock Lesnar. And in this spot where he's this huge underdog against Brock, it just seems like that story is one that's easier told in front of a crowd full of fans, no?
Well, yeah, you're right. And as a fan, of course, obviously you would feel that way. And I know how important it is, being, in spots like that. But, man, if you're one of those people on the card, you're only thinking about yourself and the totality of the team. But, whoever else is on the card, and I know that the entire card, and it's a very good card, and it's too bad it's not in front of 70,000 people at Raymond James Stadium. But anyway, so you're not thinking about Brock or Drew. You're thinking about you and what you were going to do in your match and your moment, your time to do whatever. But, yeah, as a fan, absolutely. The kid's been slugging it out, and paying his dues and just keep kind of reinventing himself. So, yeah, man, it'd be nice to see him have his moment when, the whole world is supposed to be watching it. And hopefully, as many people will tune in to the WWE Network, and while they're streaming it. But there's nothing like being in front of 70,000 or whatever the house is for that emotion to work that crowd and take them on that ride, because, that's how you're making your decisions out there.
Now, speaking of that, 21 years ago today, you and Rock did it for the first time. You guys got together at WrestleMania 21 years ago today. Well, first of all, the first one of that trilogy, 15, 17, and 19. Which one was the most meaningful? Of course, we all picture, if you're a super fan like me, we all picture at the end of 19, and we know that was a rough time for you physically. That moment when Rock kneels over you and whispers in your ear, and you guys share those personal words, we'll always remember that. It gives me goosebumps just talking about it. But of the three, what was the most meaningful, and what was that first one at 15 like?
Well, 15 was a good match, and of course, me and Rock had instant chemistry. We both loved working with each other and got along like gangbusters. In the ring, out of the ring, everywhere. So the 15 was really cool, and for Jim Ross to call that match. But, I was mad at 15 because, hell, I was going through a hell of a divorce and forgot my damn ring vest. And so I had to walk to the ring in a T-shirt. And you never want to walk to the ring in a T-shirt when it's WrestleMania and you want to look like $1 million in full gimmick. You're not trying to sell a T-shirt. You're trying to, put on a show. So that sucked on that standpoint. Now, 17 was great because at the Houston Astrodome, I've seen rodeos there. I've been to, all kinds of sporting events there as a kid because I grew up 100 miles from that building. And so to go there and to do that great build up with The Rock and, with Jim Ross, we did that sit down conversation in the locker room. That pre-match package, that bill package they put together has never been duplicated with that Limp Bizkit song. It was just off the charts to set a attendance record at WrestleMania and take the crowd on that ride. And remember, 17 was a hell of a show. And the Dudleys, the Hardys, Edge and Christian, those guys got off in like a TLC match or a ladder match, whatever it was. I mean, it was just a lights-out match. And to be the main and to be able to go out there and have that kind of match between two of the hottest guys that were on planet Earth in the wrestling business was really, really cool. And I'll never forget, we went out, we had a steak the night before that match. I had a couple of glasses of wine. And we just had a short conversation about it, and then we rocked it the next night just from start to finish. And I was feeling piss and vinegar when I was walking down that ramp, and that was a long-ass walk to that ring. My brother was on the front row. He was sitting right next to The Rock's mother. And, of course, my brother cusses a lot like me. He was cheering for me, and, of course, Rock's mother was cheering for Rock. And so they got into a little bit of an exchange, but it was all good. But that's how emotionally invested everybody was, the families. And then to go to 19 in Seattle, where I damn near didn't make that match. And I never really got medically cleared to do that match. But, hey, man, it was my time to do the favors for The Rock, and I wasn't going to miss that match because, hey, Stone Cold Steve Austin, I worked hurt, and whatever the case may be, I mean, you'd have to chain me up to a bulldozer and drag me the other way to keep me from that ring. And that was an emotional day. And, man, I damn near got teared up several times during the day because I knew I was riding off in the sunset. And when it was all said and done, it's kind of like someone lifted a big-ass weight off my shoulder. Me and Rock had a little conversation there in the ring, and then it was over. But they were all special in their own rights.
Oh, man, it's when you think about, I really do think when you picture the all-time greats, you and Rocky will always be linked in that way. And it's not just those 3 WrestleMania matches. The stories went beyond that. But that trilogy is so iconic. You mentioned having dinner with him and a glass of wine, talking things over a little bit. Of course, when you guys all work differently. And to me, what's the most fascinating thing about covering this business, but not being a true insider and understanding it, is I don't understand how you guys do what you do when you get in the squared circle. I don't understand how you're able to make poetry in motion without working everything out. Now, we know that Savage supposedly drove Steamboat crazy, laying out that match at WrestleMania 3. And that is not how you and Rocky work. So you really don't have to talk about it much at all. You talk about the big spots, the finish, that's it, and then you just go.
Man, you'll really, if you can see my finger. So if say that match lasted 30 minutes and here's 0 and here's 30 on my little finger, and we might remember 5 points in that match, but the rest of the points in between my fingers were the gaps that we filled in, on the fly because – man, a lot of people can remember a lot of things, and when you do something over and over again, you get used to that system. Hey, man, it was a little bit different back then. And so if you watch that back, or you watch any one of those matches back, you're rarely going to see a call because they're almost all being protected. But there's stuff in there. If I'm bending them, I'm head down or whatever. Most of the time I'm calling those matches, and Rock will chip in too. But we're calling stuff and we're communicating, and we're listening to that crowd, mister. That's one thing well, many things about The Rock and I were similar, but his ability and my ability to feed and understand exactly what that crowd wanted, we were on the exact same page, on the exact same word all of the time.
Now, by the way, we're talking about WrestleMania, and tomorrow on ESPN, we are re-airing another classic WrestleMania that Stone Cold was at also in Dallas, WrestleMania 32, 7 p.m. tomorrow on ESPN. And then next Sunday at 3 p.m. to get you ready for WrestleMania, we're going to be airing WrestleMania 35, also 3 p.m. next Sunday. So we're reliving these classic Mania moments. And it's funny that we were just talking about how you guys worked off the crowd. But that's not going to be an option that Edge and Randy Orton have, for example, at WrestleMania. Now, that is one match, I think, Steve, that could maybe be the thing that when this whole thing passes, we talk about. That's the match that defines this WrestleMania. Because I could see those two guys, instead of it being a liability, I could see veterans like that finding a way to make it even more special. Is that possible with Edge and Randy?
Man, I don't know, because when you talk about Randy, you're talking about a guy who's so crafted in the ring and so good at everything. And then you look at the emotional return of Edge. You know, I was just talking to him, you know, at length the other day, and, you know, all of a sudden he just started feeling better and started, you know, thinking about things. And all of a sudden, you know, when I saw him make that, I asked him point blank, I said, dude, I said, how was that response when you walked out at the Rumble? And he just lit up like a Christmas tree. And he just, I knew exactly what he felt. And it just blew his mind. And boy, when you get that kind of response, I mean, Peter, there's nothing like it in the world. And he got it. And he got many great pops, but he'd been gone so long, defying all the odds. What are the chances? And here he comes. So, like in talking about Drew McIntyre and his moment, here you got Edge making this. He's already made this comeback, and now he's working with a great, great worker and Randy Orton. And, you know, that crowd would really be behind Edge, you know, if they were there, but they're not going to be there. And I know they're going to tell a hell of a story because they're both outstanding workers. So it'll probably be an instant classic to a symphony of silence.
That's what I'm hoping we get from them. And I just know that for some of the young guys, there's no doubt about it, this is going to be challenging. Now, there are some guys who were younger, who more recently worked in front of a basically empty building. So maybe there's an advantage for some of those cats who are a little bit younger. But for the guys who came up through NXT, and that's where they got the bulk of their experience, Steve, that's not the same thing that you went through. And a lot of the guys who have been there for a long time, you know, who have worked in empty buildings before. Coming through NXT, it's a small building, but it's packed every time you work.
Well, and that's you know, when you got a packed house like that and they're very passionate, that's an intimate crowd. And you love that kind of feeling. And sometimes, you know, like for the guys that are just fresh out of any kind of like learning, or even myself going back to the days of Chris Adams Wrestling School, you know, if you're just to wrestle in front of an empty building, that's nothing but a thing because that's all you're used to. Then you go out there and you're in front of 70,000 people, and guys or the gals, maybe they're not really that over. So you're working to a different kind of silence, but because they're invested, you know, maybe in the storyline, maybe in either character. So that can be, you know, each one can be disconcerting or a lifesaver by the same token.
Let's go back to your career a bit. I was having the conversation this week on Cheap Heat, the Cheap Heat podcast, which you can get wherever you get all your ESPN podcasts, and of course Steve's incredible prop podcast, which you can find wherever you get podcasts as well. But we were talking about the Mount Rushmores, and I'm curious to what yours is, and I also have a couple of questions about maybe some modern talent. But first, when you're forced to choose 4 on a Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling, who do you put up there?
I won't pick one. Man, that's, you know, I was one of those guys that was in the ring, and if people got me on theirs, that's cool. And if they don't, you know, that's cool too. But I won't build one. I let other people do the Rushmores.
Did you have, as a kid, who were the top few that, and I've heard you say this before, but for people who haven't been here before and haven't heard you, who are the few that you really admired coming up that were certainly on Steve Austin, the Kid's Mount Rushmore?
Well, you know, just the 2 I will give you, you got to have Hogan, you got to have Flair. I'll stop right there because, you know, those are the 2 that if you're building a Mount Rushmore, those are 2 that you got to have. And I won't say any more than that.
Okay, that's fair. You know what? I'll take 2 from you. So we have 2 guaranteed. The other 2 are too controversial to fill in. And you're right, because there's no way feelings don't get hurt if you name the next 2. But everyone can accept Nate and Hogan.
You damn right. Hogan Flair or Flair Hogan. There's not a 1-2. There's not a 2-1. That's just the 2 guys that are on it.
You had Bret Hart the other day from the Broken Skull Ranch. You can watch it on the WWE Network. Great interview. Was he absolutely as smooth and easy a guy to work with as you ever worked with in your career?
Man, Bret and I had such a crazy chemistry as well for some reason, and so much, you know, a lot of people have chemistry, and a lot of people have respect for each other, and you're trusting another guy with your body at all times. Yeah, Bret was awesome. Steamboat, Steamboat was a guy that, God dang, man, he filled in all the gaps. But yeah, Bret Hart he was very, very special. He's one of my favorites of all time to work with, one of my favorites of all time to watch. I love the stories that he told. He put a lot of detail and a lot of thinking into them. And Bret was a wrestler's wrestler. He was like an artist out there painting a picture on canvas. And we're all artists in a way, Some of us are very sloppy or very violent. But I thought Bret was very meticulous in his detail to orchestrating and building a match, and I thought he was a master of the craft.
At what point were you at your lowest mentally on your ascent? Because now, Steve, we almost take for granted, Steve Austin's one of the greatest of all time. He had your career is just looked at almost like perfection. That's not really the full story. Your story from WCW to eventually becoming the Taskmaster, there's a lot of rough spots there where I'm sure, knowing the kind of competitor you are, it must have been difficult and you must have had doubts. At what stage were you in that was the hardest, where it became the hardest to see the light at the end of the tunnel?
Probably going into, you said Taskmaster was a ringmaster. Same difference. It was a bad gimmick.
Oh, sorry. That's horrible.
No big deal. I had, come through Dallas, got into the USWA, was riding with some really good guys, and Dutch Mantell, guys who were dropping a lot of knowledge on me, Gorgeous Gary Young. Got into WCW, was finding my groove. I was, respected amongst my peers as a good guy, a good worker in the ring, but I wasn't a superstar yet. But then I kind of started finding my identity, and I tore my tricep in Japan, and I'm at home. Paul Lee gives me a call. I go to ECW. I cut one promo, really. I mean, I did some skits, but I cut one promo. Paul Lee was kind of starting to dial me in. I got the call to go to New York. And when I got the call to go to New York, and I answered that phone, and Vince told me about the Ringmaster gimmick, and I got up there, and I was a Ringmaster. Peter, when you're the Ringmaster and you've been stunning Steve for about 4 or 5 years and you're pretty damn good mechanic and you can go pretty damn good, and all of a sudden you don't have that anymore, you're the Ringmaster, you don't know who you are. You're the stranger in a strange land, and you don't have anything to base your existence on. And so that was the hardest time, I think, when I was the Ringmaster. And that's why after 6 months or however long it was, I said, hey, man, I can't do this anymore because I got bigger plans for myself and I got a better gimmick. And, come up with that idea and pitched it to them. And, then the story was told from then on when I became Stone Cold from Victoria, Texas. But the Ringmaster was a period when I was lost. When I watched myself, kind of go into the ring, I'm like, who is that guy? And Peter, when you walk out in front of a crowd, and God dang, the territory is kind of down, but man, you're walking out there and you're just like rolling the dice, and you keep coming up with nothing. There's nothing. There's no pizzazz there, and so you got to kind of just turn into buzzsaw mode and just try to get yourself over and doing the best you can. And Ain't Like Creative was really helping me back then, so that was the hardest time.
Well, and I guess I've had Kevin Sullivan on my mind too much this week and said Taskmaster instead of Ringmaster. But either way, was there any regret from you when you're going, all right, I just cut this promo with Paul at ECW. They are so hot at the time. Was there any regret about not getting to really perform there, or was there not even any hesitation because you get the call from Vince, it's just time to move on and not worry about it?
Man, knew it was time to move on because, and of course I was just talking to Paul Lee down there in Florida the other day, and we're very, very close. But hey, man, everybody knew that, you're going down there, they're their main roster, and those guys are going to stay there for a little bit. But, if a guy like me, was going to get a call to go to New York, man, I had a wife and I had a house payment and all that other stuff, bills coming in the mail just like everybody else. So I needed to go to the place where I could make the most money, and that was New York. That's what we called it, the WWF at the time. So, yeah, man, working one night a week doesn't really cut it. If I could have stayed down there for, 6, 8, 9 months, who knows what we could have done, a year or two. There's all kinds of stuff we could have done, but, you're in business to make the money. And really, when you're in the trenches, even when we were in WCW and we were battling, WWF at the time, it wasn't a Monday Night War, but it was a war. And we kind of felt like we were putting on like a better wrestling product. But when you get the call, you knew that the WWE, then F was the show. It was the big show.
I want to ask you, before I let you go, I want to ask you about working with Vince McMahon, and I mean as a wrestler. Because you guys together, I mean, as much as we picture you and The Rock, someone can easily make the argument that the story, the relationship that defined your career is you versus Vince McMahon. That is a totally fair assessment, I think, for a fan to make. When you guys worked together, what was it like, him learning to wrestle at that time? How much did you walk him through things? How much did he lean to you? Because that's got to be an interesting relationship. He's the complete and total boss, but he was a novice in the ring, and he had to follow your lead. How did that working relationship go?
Well, because, working with a guy like Vince, who wasn't, the years in the business from a performance standpoint, in-ring talent, he was the guy that knows everything, because from the ground up, from when he started to where he's at now, he was that guy. So those matches are kind of put together in a fashion where, you kind of know what's up. So we're on the same page, pretty much 99% of the time. There might be an ad lib or something put in there, but, you kind of know what's going on. From a mechanic standpoint, Vince is pretty awkward, and, he's jacked up, he's strong. The stuff he does in the ring, everything feels pretty good. He'll sling you. When he's going to throw you, he's going to throw your ass, but he's kind of clumsy. But the thing I love about working with Vince was his character was so over. As a heel, that guy is a natural born performer. He's probably the greatest promoter that the sporting world or sports entertainment, whatever, boxing has ever known. But as a worker, as a performer, he knows how to work a crowd like God dang, I'm thinking about Ricky Morton, because I'm a huge Ricky Morton fan. And, of course, Ricky's the consummate white meat babyface. But what a great worker and what a great feeler of the crowd. Like a Hogan. Hogan's a great worker of the crowd. Vince can read a crowd, and he plays to that crowd, and he just loves to be, as a heel, he would love to be hated so much. And, of course, I was so over as a babyface. It magnified what I did, magnified what he did, and what he did magnified what I did. So just great chemistry, and pretty much always on the same page. And that was the kind of stuff that transcended the wrestling business and turned into water cooler talk. Even the people that didn't watch wrestling started watching wrestling, because this was a story where they could live vicariously through the actions of a guy named Stone Cold Steve Austin, this bald, pissed off guy from South Texas, and his boss has been trying to screw him every which way. And damn near every Monday night, Stone Cold is telling his boss what's up. And there's always that exchange of, hey, okay, what are we doing this time? Is it time to get more heat on Stone Cold, or does he need to get a little bit back on Mr. McMahon? So we rode that lightning boat for, close to 2 years. And I agree with you, that feud, and I've had some great ones, but that one transcended the business. And yes, ultimately, I think it did kind of, I don't know, define or make my career, however you would say it. But I loved feuding with Vince McMahon, and I learned so much from, not just working with him, but I think he learned a lot from me. But just from working for him, I've learned so much about life and everything else. I got a lot of respect for the guy.
Last thing on Vince, do you think that him and Shane, I always made up in my head that Vince and Shane sort of had a chip on their shoulder, the need to prove to you guys, because it's their company, that they were willing to do whatever it took. Is that true? And was it effective? I mean, when you see the bumps Vince took with you, where he goes off the cage flying through the table, or all the things Shane did. You look at the King of the Ring match versus Kurt Angle, maybe one of the toughest, most brutal matches anyone's ever had in this business. I always felt like it was such an honorable thing that Shane and Vince McMahon were going to show you guys, we will do everything you guys do. Is that what they were doing, and was it effective with the talent?
I can't say if that's what they were doing. Only they could. But, I've always said about Vince, he won't ask anybody to do anything that he would not do himself. And man, if it's coming down to trying to entertain a crowd, whether it's at Live House or the millions of people watching worldwide, man, he's going to go to the end of the world to make sure they get every single penny's worth out of that pay-per-view or off that viewing on that brand new TV they just bought. He's trying to give it to you. Same thing with Shane. He's got the same mentality. And I don't know if they were out to prove a point. I just think they're very, very hungry about the business and very passionate about the business. And it is a love. And damn near, all the boys, and now the girls, the women too. When I say boys, I mean everybody, the men and the women. Man, I can't explain it sometimes. When I start talking about the business, I get very excited. But, man, when you establish a deep relationship with a crowd, you'll damn near do anything to entertain them. I mean, you're talking about, getting color, heat. You want that crowd to buy in. And I think everybody kind of does it when you get in there because you want to prove yourself. And everybody wants to do as well as they can. But specifically speaking about those guys, I think they did it for the love of the business. It was really
we're going to wrap up, Steve. I'm going to let you go. Again, WrestleMania, you can watch tomorrow on ESPN. They're going to show WrestleMania 32 in its entirety, 7 p.m. on ESPN. Last question, Steve. A friend asked me earlier, and I was almost taken aback. It was almost like too much for me to answer. She has zero interest in wrestling, does not get it, has never tried to get it, and asked me, what do you love about it? And I'm almost so in it at this point that I hadn't answered it in a long time. I'm just curious for you. What do you love the most about professional wrestling?
Man, like right now or just like because when I was doing it?
Oh, you broke up a bit, Steve. Sorry. No, like in general, your passion. Like when you think about what you're most passionate about, what is it about wrestling?
Man, to me, it's just taking the crowd on a ride. I mean, because it's truly you're trying to work people. I mean, and this is before everything. Everybody knows the business doesn't work, but you're trying to get people to buy in and to be good enough and to be over enough from a character standpoint within the angle of which you're shooting and the person with which you're trying to work with. There's so many things going on, and you're trying to create the perfect mix of chemistry and storytelling to take the people on a ride that they get so invested in that they're stomping their feet, they're clapping their hands, they're yelling, they're throwing stuff at the ring. It's the adrenaline. It's the love, the passion, and the adrenaline. That's for me.
Hey, Steve, I appreciate you taking the time. You are the coolest name I have in my Rolodex. I appreciate you always, and I hope to see you down the road.